Welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast, where we deep dive into the best matches in AEW history. Brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network and your host, Sam Brown. Yes, hello and welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast. I'm your host, Sam Brown. Thank you for joining me. Every week, alongside a special guest, I take an in-depth look at one of the best matches in AEW history, taken from the definitive AEW Match Guide, as ranked by over 30 wrestling commentators from around the internet wrestling community. And you can find that match guide on WrestlingHeadlines.com. If you enjoy the show today, you can subscribe and rate it on a podcast app of your choice, and check out all the other great shows we have on the Social Suplex Podcast Network, covering all aspects of the wrestling world. My guest for today is one of the co-hosts of Keepin It Strong Style, the ace of New Japan podcasts, and he's also the boss man here at Social Suplex, so I better be on my best behavior today. Jeremy Donovan, and we're looking at the Young Bucks versus the Lucha Bros match for the AAA Tag Team Championships at Double or Nothing 2019. How are you going today, Jeremy?
I'm doing good, man. Glad to be on, man. It's been a while since we've been on a podcast together, man.
Absolutely. And it's great to have you on this new venture that I'm going on. It's great to have a lot of great guests from this network, but, you know, having the boss man in. Do I get a performance review after this, or?
Yeah, we'll so I'll submit the audio to Rich, and me and Rich will sit down and decide how it went.
Okay, tough Marcus. The question I ask everyone when they first jump on here, Jeremy, is how did you get into AEW?
Well, I think getting into AEW kind of just leads into my wrestling fandom. I've been watching wrestling since I was like 2 years old, and so obviously growing up in the 90s, WWE and WCW were the two major promotions, and then as you get older and you realize like, this wrestling isn't all of that, and then you discover stuff outside the world. Yeah, you dabble into some Ring of Honor. You find out about this guy called Bryan Danielson. You watch TNA Impact. You found out about this guy named AJ Styles, and then the whole wrestling world kind of opens up to you. You realize that there's guys in Mexico doing stuff, in Japan. And so, yeah, I've watched pretty much a lot of the major promotions growing up, and then, really getting into, I've kind of been on and off with Ring of Honor, but, obviously watching Ring of Honor, it's the first time I saw Kenny Omega, first time I saw the Young Bucks in Impact as well. So kind of following those guys' journey for a while, and then obviously become a really big New Japan Pro Wrestling fan. And obviously there, Kenny had his big rise there. The Bucks are there. They're doing stuff in the junior tag division. They eventually become the IWGP Heavyweight Tag Team Champions. And so obviously following those guys, Kenny Omega becoming my favorite wrestler. And then, 2019 comes, and, these guys are leaving New Japan. It's like, all right, what's going on? Where are they going? And then obviously they finally make the big reveal. They've started their own promotion. So, had to follow them and see what was going on.
Yeah, that's such a common through line that I'm finding as I do this. I've had Rich on before, of course, very similar to yourself. Imp, very similar, and myself as well. That through line from getting into these guys in New Japan and seeing what they're doing there, and some of Ring of Honor stuff, and them launching their own thing, and just being excited because you've seen it, you've seen the vision, you've seen what they can do, and it's like, well, let's see what happens when the rubber meets the road. And funnily enough, the match that we're looking at today comes in really early when the rubber hits the road. It's their first ever pay-per-view. So as I said, it's the Young Bucks versus the Lucha Bros from Double or Nothing 2019. And just by way of introducing the thing, the match, it got 4.75 of the chocolates from Dave Meltzer. Cage Match currently has it rated at 8.72. And in the definitive match guide that we put together earlier this year, it came in at 18th. And as I said, this is really early on in what AEW is looking like. They hadn't launched Dynamite at this point. They had only really been able to promote themselves through YouTube and other various platforms for social media. And this was one of the cornerstone rivalries going into Double or Nothing 2019. Of course, the Lucha Bros and the Young Bucks had met before that. They'd wrestled mostly in PWG, but also in the odd other indie outside of that. Jeremy, had you ever caught any of those matches?
So I don't think I saw any of their previous matches outside of AEW. I definitely saw like clips from some of the PWG stuff and some of the AAA stuff. I've definitely seen those guys wrestle live before that, not against each other, but yeah, I hadn't seen them wrestle live.
these guys were sort of natural rivals in terms of the way they wrestle is, as we'll get into, they've got very similar influences. Obviously,
Definitely.
the Lucha influence for the Lucha Bros, and
Yeah.
that's a big thing for that high flying Lucha style is what the Young Bucks sort of really based everything they did off. So natural rivals that work well together, as we'll see when we get into the match. Now, the Lucha Brothers, of course, the Young Bucks were one of the people that announced the fact that there was going to be a new promotion called AEW back just on New Year's Eve 2019. New Year's Eve 2018, 2019. They had that shot in just outside the Tokyo Dome with Hangman and Cody. And the Lucha Bros first appeared in the second press conference that they did. They came up after the Young Bucks gave a promo talking about how they wanted to promote tag team wrestling and make tag team wrestling great. The Lucha Bros confronted the Young Bucks and said, we're going to do just that. And we're going to be the ones that will be at the helm of this, not you. And of course, after that, these two sort of started squaring off a little bit on social media, on BTE, and the Young Bucks actually confronted the Lucha Bros at an indie show called The Art of War, and that's where they took the AAA tag team titles off the Lucha Bros. That was in March, and these two built from that, as I said, mostly online, mostly on social media. Jeremy, I guess going in, what did you think of the build to Double or Nothing 2019, and then also the build for this match?
Yeah, so I mean, it's very interesting. Like you mentioned, they had no TV at this point. So literally they were doing all of this through being the Elite and their YouTube channel, just really getting the message out that way. And I think we really got to stop and think just how impressive that is for this startup company. And even you look back to All In, how they were able to sell out a 10,000 seat building just by the power of YouTube. And now they're getting ready to kickstart this company and launch this big pay-per-view again with just being the Elite and YouTube. And so it's very interesting that they, you find out that diehard AEW fan base, how rabid and diehard and loyal they are. This YouTube audience that they've built up throughout the years was able to follow them through and order these pay-per-views and really get the company kicked off. So I think that's kind of a new kind of approach because, all the industry experts are like, oh, if you don't have TV, there's no way that you can make it, no way you can sell a pay-per-view, you can have a legit wrestling company. And obviously TV is very important, but it's still very impressive at this early stage that these guys were able to use that YouTube platform to launch AEW. And as far as the build to this match, I mean, when you have two great wrestlers, you also don't really need that much of a build. It's, you just market it, two of the best tag teams in the world, and you go to it. So I thought they did a good job of trying to add a little bit of story element to it, adding the AAA tag team titles, which we're actually, seeing now on Dynamite kind of reemerge. And it's all funny how the AAA title kind of just plays into the history of AEW and the Lucha Bros.
They kind of, I mean, the AAA titles kind of pop in and out at different points in AEW. At one point they're visible, and then they'll stop bringing them out. Then they'll bring them out again 6 months down the line.
Yeah, and it's just a thing with AAA. Obviously their tag team titles, their titles in general are not that important to them. And obviously, the mask versus hair matches are more of a big deal for them than the actual titles. And so they don't really care who's the titles on. And so, they like putting their titles on top, foreigners, and to get some buzz and exposure on their brand. So yeah, interesting move here, putting the titles on the Young Bucks so you can set up this rematch with the Lucha Bros. And also, I believe, wasn't at the press conference, didn't Penta also give Nick or Matt the package pile driver?
Yep, that's
on the
correct.
stage?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
yeah, they had a confrontation that led south.
Yeah, and one thing too that I forgot about going into this match is that the Young Bucks hadn't really wrestled that much in 2019. So they had their last Tokyo Dome appearance in January. Then they had that confrontation with the Lucha Bros in the match where they got the AAA belts in March, and then Double or Nothing was like their third match for the year. So that also
that's in
played.
May.
Yeah, in May. So yeah, they're off a couple months, and yeah, that really played in the story. It's like, yeah, Young Bucks, they are one of the best in the world, but they've had matches. And you look at the Lucha Bros, and those guys had literally had a match like 18 hours before in Mexico. And you just look at their 2019, those guys are, all over the place. And, I was Mania weekend New Orleans in 2018, and just kind of seeing how those guys operate. And in New York 2019, those guys, they would be the openers on one show, and then the main event on another show, and then the openers on another show, and they're literally just like driving from venue to venue, wrestling 3 to 4 matches in a day. So I know those guys had, yeah, those guys had plenty of ring time coming into this match.
Yeah, I was actually just about to mention that in the promo beforehand, they do sort of a highlights package of the build-up that's happened on YouTube and on social media and at these conferences. And one of the things that they had was, and I'd forgotten about this until I rewatched this, was the BTE skits where the Young Bucks are like trying to get back into ring shape, and they're like in this wrestling ring in like a parking lot somewhere outside of like a strip mall or something, and they're like wrestling these just complete and utter, I don't know who they were. We'll call them geeks. We'll say they're geeks.
Yeah, they're geeks.
Just wrestling these geeks, but they're like running into each other and accidentally kicking each other because they're like out of shape. And that's one of the things that informs this match as it goes on. I'd be interested to get your thoughts on that as we go through, because I'm not sure how well it did or didn't work, but we'll talk about that as we get going. As we said, this had a really good video package beforehand to detail those things that had happened for people who hadn't necessarily been subscribed to the YouTube channel, following on Twitter, all the different places that you had to go for this. But it also sort of emphasized the rise of both of these two teams. You had like videos of the Young Bucks as they were growing up, wrestling in their backyard on trampolines, kind of going up to the biggest stage and really chronicling the rise of these people who'd gone on to now launch their own promotion and had big aspirations for themselves as tag team wrestlers, aspirations that you can't necessarily fulfill in any other wrestling company in the world, who don't, most of whom don't see tag team wrestling as being the sort of big deal that I guess the Young Bucks envisioned it could be, and were hoping to make it that way in AEW. They've got, big entrances. This is the second last match of the night. Goes on just before the main event, which was Kenny Omega versus Chris Jericho. Big entrances. I have to say I love both of the teams' gear for this match. You've got the Lucha Bros in matching black and white, and then the Young Bucks come out in their sort of white Elvis costumes.
Yeah.
Vegas. Makes sense. Yeah. I think these two teams both had their gear was just really on point.
Yeah, the gear looked good. I mean, the overall just double or nothing setup looked great. Big stage, you had the big poker chip. It just felt like kind of that classic, like old school WWE pay-per-view where you kind of had the fancy stage. And yeah, you had big pay-per-view stage. The gears are awesome. I also like the Young Bucks, their Elvis gear, and the Lucha Bros had those kind of like skeleton masks on top of their ring masks. I thought that looked cool also.
Yeah, I feel like that's. For me, that's my favorite Lucha Bros gear. I think I kind of really liked Pentagon's Joker one as a once-off, but then when he kept wearing, I guess when you pay for these sorts of gears, you probably want to get your money's worth. But when he kept on wearing it, it lost its luster for a bit for me. But I loved this particular matchup that they had.
Yeah, Penta definitely got his money's worth out of that Joker gear. He wore that like every week.
Yeah,
but yeah. both the gear was on point here. Also we got the introduction to like Lucha Bros AEW, their first AEW theme, which I thought was pretty cool also.
Yeah, that was underrated. Like I've heard criticisms of some of the early AEW themes, like the Private Party one, which was literally just like, this is a private party. It just kept on repeating the same thing. Yeah. And they had that for a lot of them. Even the Lucha Bros one, they'd have like one little refrain that would be repeating. But I think that's as much a factor of Mickey Ruckus being like literally a one-man band and having to put together a whole promotion's worth of intro music in probably a couple of weeks.
And I mean, that's just kind of also the trope of wrestling music in general. I mean, a ton of wrestling teams have like one verse and then the chorus just repeats over and over again.
Yeah, these guys just had one line though. So.
Yeah, Lucha Bros, Mexicans, Zero Mero, bring it to the ring.
Yeah, I don't know. That was one of the ones that worked for me. There was some that didn't, but that was one of the ones that worked for me. I think and the atmosphere that it set, it was kind of sinister a little bit, and they felt sinister. Particularly Penta. He is just a master of body language. And a master of creating an atmosphere, even though he's got a mask on, emoting through the mask, and his demeanor really fit with that sort of more sinister track that had going underneath it, like a bit of a minor key. Felt a bit grimy, a bit gritty. I really liked that theme. So yeah, going into the match, the crowd, of course, very, very hot at this stage. They've got, they didn't have a giant following at this point, but a absolute diehard following. Oh, that said, they did sell 100,000 pay-per-views, which is pretty good, as we've said, it was purely built through social media buzz. But really hot crowd, love a hot crowd. And one of the interesting things that they didn't do later on that they did in this match is they had the introduction, but then Rick Knox got on the mic and said to both teams, it was kind of almost like a UFC thing of, we want to have a clean but hard fight. Personally, I'm glad that didn't continue. Did you notice that when you rewatched it? Did that stick out to you?
Yeah, that stood to me as well. Yeah, because they got both teams came to the ring, and Justin Roberts did the ring announcements, and they turned it over to Rick Knox. It's like almost kind of like that referee from boxing, and like they did it for like Celebrity Deathmatch on like MTV. Yeah. Like, I want a nice clean fight. Let's get it on.
Yeah, that's something they do in the UFC all the time. You'll have the two, touch gloves.
Right. Yeah. Explain the rules to you in the back.
That's it.
Want a nice clean fight. And so very interesting approach. So you can kind of see here in the early AEW days, they're still trying to figure out exactly what they want to do, how they want to make themselves different. Also, something that stood out to me right away was Alex Marvez was on commentary with Excalibur and JR, and just like how not great he was.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and weirdly enough, they actually cut to a shot of Tony Schiavone in the crowd just wearing like an Affliction t-shirt or something. And I was like, oh, yeah, he's not part of this deal yet at this point. So, and you could tell Excalibur and JR, are both expert commentators, but are still like working out their flow. And even I watched some of the earlier matches in this, and JR was so excited to explain the new tag team rules, how you could have 10 seconds, and trod all over Excalibur trying to say something else. I think Excalibur was explaining how Justin Roberts or one of the people in the ring was going to say something, and JR wanted to introduce these rules, and they were sort of standing on each other's toes a little bit. So, still feeling each other out, working out how they're going to work together. Not that they didn't do a good job during this match, but yeah, as you said, they're kind of, the whole company is like working out what things are going to look like and how things are going to be.
Right, and then you have Marvez just like says random stuff, and like you have like dead silence, which he'll say something, and there'll be like a 10-second pause, and then JR or Excalibur will jump back in.
Yeah. I think they got him in a good spot now. It's the backstage the roving backstage commentator. Certainly. The match starts off with Penta and Matt Jackson in the ring. We're not going to go through every move that we've got in the match here. But, Penta, I love this spot that Penta does where he pulls off the glove, flicks it. In this case, he flicks it to Rick Knox, who sort of catches it and like winks at him and shoots a little gun at him. Like, yep, I got you, mate. I like that. And immediately there's the Zero Miedo taunt, but Matt Jackson just like doesn't let him finish it off. He catches his hand, and then they start trading moves immediately, and then they tag each other out, and then the other two start trading moves.
Yeah, with the Zero Miedo for Pentagon, again, like rewatching this, I was just so impressed like how over Pentagon was in. Also, I've seen Penta in the indies with a few thousand people, but a full 10,000 plus arena on pay-per-view, like how he owned that room and how over he was with very limited mainstream American exposure. Obviously, he was on Lucha Underground, but that didn't really hit a huge audience. And then he did like other random indies. Obviously, there was also All In, but Impact, but he didn't have that huge, American exposure, or he wasn't in New Japan. He didn't have that big kind of following, but yet he was still so over and just controlled the room.
Yeah, certainly for myself, I hadn't seen much of the Lucha Bros together. I'd heard of Phoenix as this like high flyer, but I had some friends who absolutely loved Lucha Underground, and they sent me a few matches over the years. And Penta absolutely stood out as just this guy who had such incredible charisma. And up until I saw him, I'd only really seen luchadors like Rey Mysterio, because I mean most of what I've watched in wrestling was WWE, and literally they have Rey Mysterio and then a bunch of people that they try to just plug into exactly the same role that Rey Mysterio has. And that's no offense to those guys like Kalisto and Sin Cara. You know, they did the best they could, but Pentagon was the first luchador that I saw that was like something completely different, really, and was, you know, this menacing, sinister figure who, you know, was almost like he was out of like a horror film. And the first time I really saw him in a live sense was All In. And, you know, immediately, as you said, owns the room, is able to project, and just has a sense of menace but theatrics to all of the moves that he pulls off. Yeah, so as I said, these guys trade a little bit, but then they switch over to Nick and Phoenix. I really liked that immediately both pairs sort of set up the dichotomy of how they wrestle. You've got Pentagon and Matt, who are more power, and Matt definitely does the strength and the technical stuff, the setup stuff. Penta is, you know, like really hard kicks and strikes. You've got that dichotomy, and then you've got Matt and Nick Jackson, who are very high flying, very athletic, and they immediately set that sort of contrast between the two pairs up.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that. Yeah, the older brothers, the younger brothers kind of paired off, and very similar styles. And also, you know, Nick Jackson and Phoenix, man, when they're doing their exchanges and their sequences, it's just like high flying heaven. You know, Nick Jackson, he missed out a lifetime in Mexico, because this guy's doing, you know, the big escalera, you know, or corkscrew to the outside, and both of them are just exchanging like these crazy high flying moves. It was awesome.
Yeah, that first sequence that they do, I love that they don't hit each other. They're just like constantly evading it. That one goes for a big move, the other one does something athletic to evade it, tries for another move, and then they end up double drop kicking each other. And the crowd, of course, when they see this, goes absolutely berserk. And what a great introduction for Phoenix, because as we said, Pentagon introduces himself with just this charisma and theatrics, which, you know, Phoenix is no slouch, but he's not on the same level as Penta with that. But, you know, this is how Phoenix gets over, by immediately just going there and blowing everyone's mind and being just, whoa, what is this guy doing?
And something we also saw like early on in the match, kind of the story that we were talking about earlier with the Young Bucks, you know, not having wrestled that much and kind of being off their game a little bit. And so we did see some like miscommunication very early on in the match, where like they got bumped into each other, or they were kind of off a step.
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up, actually, because that's like the next sort of thing that happens in this one, to set up that inter story by the Young Bucks, is they go for a move, just slightly mistime it, and then they run into each other instead of, you know, I guess in the past the idea is that they would flawlessly pull off this double team maneuver. Because they're running at such high speeds and they haven't had much time in the ring, the announcers are saying this is their third match of the year, and the Lucha Bros literally wrestled 18 hours earlier. So, you know, they've got to shake off the ring rust to be able to match it with these guys who are just running hot and fueled up and ready to go, just a purring motor at this point. I'm going to be honest, I found this a tad contrived in the way that it was executed. And the reason was, I liked the idea in concept, but the problem was they're so flawlessly pulling everything else off, and it's just these moves. And when they they're running into each other, and when they go to do it, it doesn't actually look scrappy or like it's it looks like it's meant to happen to me. I don't know if that's just me, and I'd be interested to get your take on it. It felt too contrived for me, this particular subplot, and the way they executed in the ring, and the fact they were able to pull everything else off flawlessly, for it to be something that I bought into as a story.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, like you mentioned, a good idea, but the execution wasn't that great. I mean, like you're saying, like they're still doing everything else fine. They're doing the more bang for your buck. They're doing all their other signature moves fine. It's just a few key moves where they kind of bumped into each other. And it just looked kind of clunky and awkward, and it's like it didn't come off well. It's like the Young Bucks are one of the best tag teams in the world, and they were only off for a couple months. Like they weren't off for a year or a long layover. And so just to think those guys would all of a sudden just kind of like lose their steam and their momentum and their flow over a couple months off, I don't know. It's just kind of weird. Like you said, everything else they did was fine in the match. They executed everything great. It was just those few spots, and I was like, I get the story, but they're not really sticking with it. Like, they should have been more of a struggle. Like, they should have been
Yep.
struggling with like everything. There should have been more off timing. There should have been Matt and Nick should have been arguing with each other, being like, "Hey, man, you're off. No, you're off a step." And like, there should have been more, a little bit
Yeah.
more frustration if they're wanting to tell that story. But at the same time, I'm kind of glad they didn't lean into it, because I think it would have hurt the match.
That's true.
If they had played too much to that story.
It's a fine line, and it could definitely, like, it could work. It's a concept that I think could work, because, as we said, there's four. They're operating at a really high pace. There's four people in there, and there's two people who are trying to like time things perfectly in that situation. It's completely believable that if you've been out of the game for even a couple of months, that maybe your timing might not be off, and it only needs to be off by like half a second, and then all of a sudden you're running into one another. But I think part of it was, they're executing everything else flawlessly. The one time I've seen this work was AJ Styles accidentally botched it was at some tournament. I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it might have been Ring of Honor, but he accidentally botched the flying forearm when he went for it. He slipped on the rope, and then the next match when he went to go for it, he slipped again. He intentionally slipped again, and because it was it was a shock, and it was done so inelegantly, I bought into it. And then the thing that really sold it was the third time he hesitated, because in his mind he was like, I can't make this. I'm not. It had got into his head, and I didn't see that sort of hesitation or anything from the Bucks at any point, and it didn't feel like a mistake enough for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I feel like it was really focused in at like the beginning of the match, and you really didn't see much of it throughout the rest. Like, they had a little miscommunication at the beginning, and then pretty much from there, like, they were hitting everything else perfectly.
Yeah, and look, we're picking nits here. This is
right.
We're not, this is a really good match, and we're going to get into that. But I just wanted to pull that out, because I don't know, for me, I'd forgotten that was part of this match until I rewatched it, and particularly on the rewatch, it just didn't flow for me. It didn't work for me. But getting along with what else happened, it was real. This match is really back and forth. I'd say that the Lucha Bros probably had the slight edge in terms of they were getting a little bit more offense in, and that probably actually plays into that idea as well. That I've just said that I didn't buy into, that, the Young Bucks are potentially behind their opponents by a step or two. But each of the teams has some great moments. Personally, my favorite one was when the Bucks hit the Motor City Machine Guns finisher, the Made in Detroit, the corner powerbomb sliced bread combo. Love that kind of idea of like a throwback to these guys that had so influenced them and such an integral part to their rise and their belief in tag team wrestling, when, as we said, their mission is to make tag team wrestling great. So, of course, they pull out of their back pocket one of the great moves from one of the great teams. Jeremy, was there any particular spots that stood out to you as the match went on?
Yeah, I'll see the main Detroit stood out to me, because I definitely was a fan of the Young Bucks versus Machine Guns in Impact, and I love the Motor City Machine Guns, and Chris Sabin was one of my favorites in Impact. So, yeah, it was kind of cool to get that kind of shout out there. There was a spot where Pentagon did the like pop-up destroyer off of Phoenix's back to Matt Jackson on the apron, and then Nick Jackson did a destroyer to Phoenix in the ring. That was another great spot. You had Phoenix, he did the...
That was when they started the destroyer escalation in AEW.
Yes.
Actually, no, that started when Dustin did one, and then these guys were the first people to one-up it.
Then you had a spot where like Phoenix did like a crazy like springboard, like super Hurricane Rana thing. I think he did to like Nick Jackson. That was pretty cool.
He's because I had that one noted down as well. So like Nick Jackson is on the ropes. He's been crutched on the ropes, and Phoenix, as he goes to jump to the ropes opposite, he does a back heel to him. He kicks him with the back of his foot, and then jumps off the ropes across and Hurricanrana's Nick off it. Just insane stuff, as we said. Like Phoenix introducing himself to the world at this point.
Right. And then Matt Jackson busting out the locomotion Northern Lights suplex was a pretty cool spot.
Yep.
So yeah, tons of great spots in this match.
Yeah. I think for me, the thing that makes the Young Bucks matches so good And the thing that makes them so successful is how they escalate matches. Because like there's a lot of teams, and we've all been to indie shows where they can pull off these spectacular moves, but it doesn't hit in the same way. And there's lots of people who have all these things in their arsenal but can't build a match like the Young Bucks do. And even though, from the word go, they're still wrestling at a good pace, the way they escalate things and escalate the drama of the match, I think that's like the secret sauce to what makes the Young Bucks so great and what makes their matches hit on a different level to a lot of the other tag teams out there that, as I said, can pull out those sorts of moves. And, as this match really hits its finishing stretch, you get a feel of that escalation and that frenetic energy that's in the ring.
Yeah, definitely. And like you mentioned, their pacing is just always been so incredible. And they kind of start off like they're still doing cool stuff, but it's to kind of start off slow, and then they kind of build that escalation to you're getting to all the crazy destroyers, the crazy springboard moves, their double sharpshooter stuff, the Made in Detroit, the package pile driver dropkick spot combo move that they did also towards the end. So it's this kind of slow build, and I think a lot of people, they see the gifts and they're like, oh, the Young Bucks are just spot monkeys. They just they just throw out these big moves, but if you watch all their matches, there's always a story and there's always kind of an escalation, like you mentioned, to this kind of crescendo or where they're hitting these big moves.
Yeah, I think the ending of this match was sort of signaled by the double destroyer spot that you mentioned earlier. As you said, Penta hits just an insane destroyer on the apron, and then they fall off onto the padding on the outside, and then Phoenix like leaps over the top of the ropes to get Nick. Just as we've said a few times already, mind-bending stuff. And then I really liked the Young Bucks pull out another tribute, this time to the Lucha Bros. They hit the package pile driver stomp combo on Pentagon. That gets a 2, and then they also pull out El Generico's Brainbuster. Top
yes. Yeah, I remember. I have that written down also. Yeah, because that move is, you haven't seen that move in a while. Like Sami Zayn used to kill that in Ring of Honor as El Generico, and so I popped huge that when Matt Jackson did it. It just looks so gnarly. It looks like he killed Phoenix.
Oh yeah, it's such a brutal looking move. Like just the way they just the sheer drop brainbuster, top rope brainbuster. They just drop him. I don't know how you protect yourself on that one. You're the former wrestler, John Juris. You can tell me that. Yeah, Penta does manage to do the arm snap on Matt. Don't know if he got the whole thing or not, because Matt's arm didn't look like it was broken. Although it does play into the ending where Matt, to set him up for the Meltzer driver, he's kind of holding on with one arm and gripping his arm with the arm that wasn't broken, kind of showing that the effect that had on him. They hit the Meltzer driver, get the 3 count, and that's the end of the match. So what did you think of the sort of the ending stretch there, Jeremy?
Yeah, like we were saying, the built so well to the ending stretch and just kind of throwing out all these big moves, throwing out the brain buster. They're doing the package pile driver double stomp combo, and both teams are just trying so hard. You mentioned Pentagon with the arm break spot, which he really got over in Lucha Underground, is a really dangerous move. And so they're throwing out all the big guns towards the end there. And then it was again kind of circling back to the story of can the Young Bucks do it. And they finally get the Melter driver pulled off and get the big win. So very obviously an incredible matchup, and it's a great way to close off the match and get the Young Bucks a win here on the first big pay-per-view. I did something funny that I just thought about was just throughout the match. I don't know if you remember, Marvez is talking about the Young Bucks have a new move that they're planning to use, and they never did anything new throughout the match. They did the tribute stuff to the Machine Guns and Zayn and Lucha Bros, but they won with the Melter driver.
I do remember, I think on BTE they were saying, oh, they're going to bring something back or something like that, but they won with the Melter driver, which they do all the time. So yeah, I don't know what that was. That was a plot thread that didn't necessarily get picked up. I guess wrestlers needed to learn to communicate with the commentary on that one. Now, in terms of the actual legacy and the aftermath of this match, So everything about like Double or Nothing 2019 was setting the scene for something that AEW would realize, be it sort of the start of Hangman's trek up to the main event, which he started by being in the Casino Royale Battle Royale, be it bringing Joshi wrestlers into America and putting and showcasing them in the mainstream in a way that hadn't before, or even just the way they set up the single stars for the company with Cody, Kenny and Chris obviously in the main event, and then Moxley who debuted afterwards. What do you think this match sort of set up for AEW?
Yeah, I think this match kind of laid the foundation for what the vision was going to be for the tag team division. Like we're going to have the best tag teams in the world. They're going to be spotlighted. They're going to get a ton of time. They're going to be, a semi-main event matchup. And I think that's kind of opened the door to bring in teams like Proud and Powerful and FTR, and some of the top tag teams around the world, Best Friends. They got to bring in all these different tag teams and give them spotlight and kind of, lay the foundation, kind of set the bar. Like, this is what you are going to expect from an AEW tag team title match. And obviously this was like the first, foundational tag team rivalry as well, because throughout this first run, we're going to see this rivalry kind of expand. They're going to have the 6-man tag at Fyter Fest, which, me and Rich and Josh were live for here in Daytona, Florida, when it was them and Laredo Kid against the Bucks and Kenny. And then that would lead, eventually to them facing again at All Out in the Escalera de la Muerte ladder match for the AAA tag titles. And then now, we fast forward, we see that rivalry got reignited again when the Lucha Bros got the titles from the Young Bucks in the steel cage match. So we just kind of see that thread and that rivalry just kind of being the centerpiece of the AEW tag division. And now it's something they could always go back to. They don't really need to do a long build. I mean, at any point they could always shift back. And you could also, because also right now the Bucks are heels and the Lucha Bros are the faces. But once again, you could always switch the dynamic back.
Yep.
You can always do another title match. There's always ways that you can always do something to bring those guys back together. And it'll always kind of be the foundation. You'll have this history from the first pay-per-view.
You could even, I don't know how this would ever work out, but I always love it sometimes when like something happens and rivals band together. So I don't know if like one day FTR does something dastardly, like the natural enemy of both of these teams is FTR because of the styles clash they both have. I could see these guys doing something together, maybe even against FTR. Right. Who knows? Right. And that, actually now I've said that, FTR and Lucha Bros teamed up against the Young Bucks and Hangman and Kenny last year in 2020 when they were, and they're having that stretch just after FTR debuted. So this one's like sort of dotted throughout. This rivalry's dotted throughout the history of AEW now.
Yeah, and also there was the the Nick Jackson and Phoenix match on Dynamite. Yep. And I think that was in 2019.
It was 2019. Yep.
Yeah, and so again, like you can always do stuff like that. I mean, you could also have, you could do like a random thing where like the younger brothers team up against the older brothers. Like there's a ton of stuff that they can still do.
That would be very random. That's the most random of them all, I think, Jeremy. I don't know if I'd buy that one, to be honest.
Hey, you never know. At some point down in the future, you could have, there could be some arguments. And
although you did have like all those random matches earlier this year in earlier 2021 where it was like Pentagon and Eddie, and then like Pac and Phoenix against the Young Bucks. But until they actually got to the actual Lucha Bros versus the Young Bucks.
And that's something fun they could do for like Dark. I don't know if they would actually do it, but right now on Dark there's a lot of random stuff happening. You have Cody wrestling as Fuego 2. Daniel Bryan's wrestling as Infinito. So they're doing a lot of random stuff on Dark. So why not, do Matt and Penta versus Nick and Phoenix.
I think we'll leave those combinations there. I think. In terms of like the other tag team matches that came in the definitive countdown when the voting came in, this was behind obviously the Bucks versus Kenny and Page, which was the top match for the definitive match guide. Came in behind the ladder match, the parking lot fight, and the Bucks versus Eddie and Mox. But it was ahead of Starks and Cage versus Darby and Sting. It was ahead of the Brody Lee tribute match between Hangman, John Silver, and Alex Reynolds versus MJF and Proud and Powerful. And it was also ahead of Arcade Anarchy Do you think that's sort of a fair place for it to slot in terms of the legacy of this match against the ones that are behind it and the ones that are in front of it?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair spot for it. I mean, these guys definitely outdid each other every time they wrestled each other. You know, you look at the ladder match, and you fast forward to the cage match. Like,
yeah, I'm sure the cage match, when we redo the voting next year, I'm sure that cage match is going to rank very highly.
Right. Yeah. It's like every time these guys, they've always kind of one up each other every time we wrestled. So I think it was a good spot for it. Like we mentioned, like there was still like very like nitpicky stuff a while. Like that wasn't probably a full 5-star match for some people. With the whole story with the Young Bucks, you know, trying to get their groove back or whatever, and just some small stuff. And so I mean, it's still one of the best matches in the promotion's history. And like I mentioned, the kind of that foundational tag match. And we saw a lot of teams kind of take that challenge to outdo that match.
I feel like it fits in there. The one that stands out to me is the Bucks versus Eddie and Mox. I really like that match, but I do think it benefits a little bit from the voting happening very soon after it happened, and it also being the return of live crowds in terms of the way the crowd was reacting to it. I think in hindsight, we may find that one might be ranked a little bit more highly. I haven't revisited it yet, and you know, you won't find a bigger Moxley fan than me. But but I do. If there's one that I think may end up swapping places, it might be that one. The other one as well might be the Bucks versus SCU. The career-ending match, which is one that slipped under the radar a little bit. It ended up much higher on the match guide list in terms of it was a lower positioned but higher number. And I think on review that one could creep up on us, I think, if anything. But that's for another podcast potentially. And in terms of, as you said, lots of other tag teams sort of grabbed the ball after these guys displayed their wares. One of the things I wanted to bring up, just to sort of bring things to a close, is that, you know, despite these two teams being the leaders of the division in the pre-Dynamite era, as you said, they went on to have that 6-man match with Kenny and Laredo Kid, and then they also had the ladder match at All Out. Both teams sort of took a back seat a little bit when Dynamite kicked off. You know, the Bucks very famously got beaten by Private Party early on, and the Lucha Bros got beaten in the finals of that tournament, and then sort of, if anything, eventually like disbanded almost, and were apart for quite a while, sort of teaming with different people. I'm not sure how much the pandemic had to do with that. I know there was some injuries sprinkled in there. But with hindsight, how do you feel about these two teams that were sort of the front runners and the leaders taking a bit more of a back seat once Dynamite kicked in?
Yeah, I definitely thought it was a little bit of an interesting approach, because I mean, those were the two teams that were built all throughout the beginning of the company pre-Dynamite. So you would think that at least one of those teams would be the first tag team champions. And I don't know, personally, if it was me, like I'm fine with the Bucks losing to Private Party and, you know, pulling that upset and giving Private Party some juice, but I really feel like they should have probably made the Lucha Bros the first AEW tag team champions, especially since they ended up winning the Escalera de la Muerta ladder match. Like that should have been the momentum they needed to kind of steamroll through the tournament and win and be the first tag team champions, and kind of be kind of the cornerstone team, since they beat the Young Bucks in kind of that feud ending match for that time period. So to put it on SCU, it was kind of interesting. And I get it. I mean, SCU was one of the popular acts on BTE, and they were kind of a big part of that initial, you know, elite universe. But now you look back at it now, you look back at their reign, and I mean, yes, they had some good matches, but I don't know. I felt like things probably could have been a little bit better if you had Penta and Phoenix kind of carrying the ball of the tag division for the beginning of Dynamite.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same when I'm thinking about it, because one of the best early matches that Kenny and Hangman obviously had was against the Lucha Bros. And I feel like they may have been a little bit of a better obstacle for Kenny and Hangman to overcome to sort of win these titles. You know, these, particularly given that one of the big tensions is Hangman's feeling that he isn't as good as the Young Bucks and as good as Kenny, and the fact that this is the team that beat the Young Bucks. How, you know, can Hangman beat these guys? That would have been a nice and interesting bit of narrative there. And yeah, as you said, if you look at where these teams have ended up, I do feel like the Lucha Bros could possibly have been served well, and the division may have worked out better if they were the initial focus as champions early on. After that, obviously the tournament was a priority at first, but after that happened, I did feel like the tag team division was kind of on the back burner a little bit. And part of that could have just been because, they had SCU doing it, who weren't necessarily as hot as, say, the Lucha Brothers could have been, particularly when you've got someone who's just like so charismatic in Pentagon and someone who is so spectacular in Phoenix. They're just a very eye-catching duo because of how they complement each other.
Yeah, and I feel like SCU, like their popularity was kind of waning a little bit.
Yep, that's perfect way to put it. Yep.
Yeah, going into the start of AEW, because I mean, for them, I feel like the peak of SCU was definitely the ending of Ring of Honor. 2018, that 2018 run, SCU was super hot, and this is the worst town. Yeah. That was super over, but yeah, I felt like that was kind of falling off kind of as Dynamite was starting up. So like you mentioned, I felt like the tag titles and the whole tag scene wasn't really that much of a focal point leading into Dynamite and going into Dynamite after the tournament, but then things pick back up once Kenny and Hangman get the titles, and we see like the incredible matches that Kenny and Hangman have, and just the focus they brought back the tag division, and then obviously drop into FTR, and then since then I just felt like the tag titles are also like a key part of Dynamite now. The tag division is so important, and then you get the FTR Young Bucks, and obviously the Bucks have been the champions for the past year, and then they finally lose them to Lucha Bros, and now Lucha Bros are getting ready to feud with FTR. So I definitely think, that beginning, they're still trying to find their footing on what the tag division was going to be. But then once they got it to Hangman and Kenny, like the thing just like hit a whole nother gear.
And obviously, like long term, everything's worked out perfectly. I think the Young Bucks are far better as heel champions, and their run was just incredible that they had this year. And if they'd potentially taken the titles straight away, I don't think it would have worked. I think that was a great decision to not do that. And the Lucha Bros did feel super hot when they did finally win it as well. So look, we're armchair quarterbacking here, but who knows what our little tinkering with time would have had, what ramifications that would have had long term, because I wouldn't trade that cage match I'd trade that for very little.
Exactly. Yeah.
Even just the presentation of the Lucha Bros coming out in their Aztec gear, it felt just so big and so momentous for them, which maybe would have been devalued if they'd already been champions. So yeah, look, who knows? That's all the questions I've got for you, Jeremy. Is there anything else you'd like to add about this match before we wrap things up?
I mean, again, if people are listening to this and they have not watched this match ever, or maybe they haven't watched it in a while, I would definitely say it's worth going back and rewatching and just seeing how awesome this match was, and just how this kind of kicked off the tag division, like we said, and also too just the feel of Double or Nothing compared to like how AEW feels now. Like I feel like that show, even though it was still obviously a big pay-per-view and kind of a big, more of a high league promotion type of show, there was definitely a very indie like spirit or feel to that show.
100%. Yep.
In that crowd. And obviously the AEW crowds are still awesome today, but there was something about the Double or Nothing crowd and the atmosphere. It felt more similar to All In, which I was able to go to, and like All In is like one of the best crowds best shows I've ever been to. Like there was just something about that atmosphere that was just so different than any show I've ever been to, and I feel like Double or Nothing had that kind of the same vibe. And then as Dynamite and shows get kicked off, I don't know, something shifted, and it kind of shifted more into like a mainstream type of feel. But Double or Nothing definitely had that very still kind of indie, us versus the world kind of mindset and field.
Yeah, felt like you were part of a movement. I mean, that's what Cody said after All In, right? He said this feels like a movement. And I think, for people who bought into it, such as myself, really, like it did feel like you were traveling along with these guys. And obviously you're not the one wrestling, but it did feel like you were a big part of this, and less so now. Not that being a fan isn't great. Being fair, we've just spent like an hour talking about one match. It's great being a fan of AEW at the moment, but I understand what you're saying. It's minorly different, but I think Double or Nothing 2019 is almost prescribed viewing for any potential AEW fan. Like if you've been watching AEW for a few months and really enjoying it, this is something you should definitely go back and watch, because as I said, everything they did in this card was to set things up for what would happen down the line. And it is such a historic moment for the company, even though they are, as we've said, trying to find their feet, they're trying a few things that don't necessarily stick and maybe don't hang on. And, you might see a Joshi wrestler there that you never see again, and you're like, oh, isn't that random? Or,
right.
something.
Yeah.
Bret Hart shows up and never shows up again. But,
right.
But it's such an important landmark with, as you said, the success of it. Even though they only built it on social media, essentially on their YouTube channel and on the Being the Elite YouTube channel, Twitter, obviously, and what they could do outside of that. But mostly it was social media built, and they sold 100,000 pay-per-views, and they sold out a 10,000 seat arena for a second time. Like an incredible success for the company, and not something that people thought could happen. Like the joke that kicked all of this whole thing off was Dave Meltzer, like the people that everyone thinks is the great shill and the great cheerleader, him saying that it'd be impossible for any company that isn't WWE to sell 10,000 tickets in North America, and Cody saying, I'll take you up on that bet, and doing it twice. Like,
right.
It was an unprecedented success, and it's definitely something that's worth watching and going back to see.
Yeah, and it's also just worth watching too, because AEW rewards their fan bases for sticking around the long haul. Like they reward you for being a long time viewer. Like we mentioned, there's a lot of stuff set up on this show that if you watch this and then you look forward, there's a lot of stuff that'll set up. And like the Young Bucks Lucha Bros feud that just happened, I feel is definitely enhanced for the long time viewer who saw this initial feud. Yeah,
100%. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely go back and catch this match if you haven't. I feel like I say that at the end of every single episode. I have to put that on the banned phrases list for here at AEW Match Guide. Can't say that here, pal. Anyway, Jeremy, tell the good people where they can find you.
Yeah, so you guys can follow me on Twitter at Jeremy L. Donovan. Like Sam said in the beginning of the show, I am one half of Keeping It Strong Style. You can follow that at KI Strong Style on Twitter. And you can find us every week on the Social Suplex Podcast Network. Keeping It Strong Style drops late Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning Eastern time. We're covering obviously everything in the world of New Japan Pro Wrestling. Not sure when this episode will be coming out, but we'll probably be maybe into Wrestle Kingdom season. So obviously a lot of great stuff to follow. We got 3 Wrestle Kingdom shows this year, so we'll be doing a ton of previews and getting hyped up for that.
Yeah, if my schedule is right, Wrestle Kingdom is like just around the corner. It's about 2 weeks away, so definitely jump on that. Yeah, definitely. Any chance of AEW guys showing up there?
Well,
the forbidden door being opened.
Actually, I have heard rumors from one of my sources that there could potentially be some involvement, at least from one guy, if things work out with.
Very interesting.
I'll mark that
down. I'll hold you to it. 2.5 months time. We'll see what shows up. Anyway, thank you very much for jumping on here today, Jeremy, and thank you for hosting me on the network. I really appreciate it. As I've said at the end of every single episode, if you've enjoyed this, please rate and subscribe it. That really helps us out here. And comment and hit me up on Twitter. You can find me Sir_Samuel, and tell me what you thought of this match. Tell me what you thought of the early AEW Double or Nothing, and what you made of it if you were there at the time, or if you've gone back and rewatched it, what you thought since. And also tell a friend about the podcast. Get them involved. I'd love to have as many people on this bus as possible. But until I see you next time, next week, we are doing Riho versus Serena Deeb from Double or Nothing 2021. So 2 years in the future from this match that we've looked at today. But thank you very much for listening. I will see you again next week. Thanks for listening to the AEW Match Guide podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then you can subscribe on the podcast app of your choice so you never miss an episode. Also, feel free to let me know on Twitter at Sir_Samuel. I'd love to hear from you. The AEW Match Guide podcast is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network, where you can find many other fantastic podcasts discussing not just AEW, but all parts of the world of professional wrestling. Looking forward to seeing you again next week. I'm Sam Brown.